Hello, I'm Dr. Louise Freeman, psychology professor at Baldwin College. We're very excited about the premiere of the last of the Hunger Games movies, Mockingjay Part 2, coming up in just a few days. We're actually having a special midnight screening for our Mary Baldwin students here in Stanton, Virginia. Now, I'm a big fan of the Hunger Games series, and as a psychologist and a neuroscientist, I have a particular interest in psychological themes within young adult literature. What you're about to see is the first in a series of 3 talks based on a presentation I'm giving to students on campus in honor of the movie premiere. I'm focusing on what will no doubt be a big portion of the second Mockingjay movie, PETA's hijacking, and the scientific basis for it. So, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to presentation number 1 on psychology and what it tells us about the plot of the second Mockingjay movie. Now, I've been teaching psychology for 16 years now and have taught a variety of courses: introduction, statistics, forensic psychology, learning behavior, behavioral neuroscience. One thing I have noticed over the years is how many concepts from my courses can be illustrated with examples from books and movies that my students come to my class familiar with already. Now, the first major series I found that this worked for was, of course, Harry Potter, but right now, the one everyone's most excited about is the Hunger Games franchise, which is winding up with the release of Mockingjay Part 2, an event that is not far away at all now. So, our topic for this series of videos is psychology in Mockingjay. And I think a variety of students from different psychology classes, introductory, cognitive, abnormal, behavioral neuroscience, will find something of interest in these videos. If you're not a student of psychology, and I still think you'll enjoy them because learning a little bit about the psychology in there, about the conditions the characters has, really helps us understand them better. And given the fascination with this series, I think the psychological realism is one of the reasons it has become so popular. So, for this particular video, we're going to be talking about Pavlov, PETA, and PTSD. Hijacking, fear conditioning, and what to expect in Mockingjay Part 2. So, we're going to pick up exactly where Mockingjay Part 1 left off, with PETA back with Katniss in District 13, but now, thanks to the Capitol, hijacked and trying to kill her. We're going to look very in-depth at this concept of fear conditioning, what it is, how it develops, and what it means for post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a condition a lot of Hunger Games characters have, and of course that a condition that's very relevant to our own society. So, just to give you fair warning, if you have not read the Mockingjay books yet, which you really should do, by the way, I will be talking about a few things that happen in Mockingjay. So if you want a completely spoiler-free movie experience, you would need to stop this video, come back after you've either seen the movie or read the book. However, all the spoilers I'm going to be giving are very minor. I will not be giving away any major plot twists. So my intention is that this presentation be reasonably spoiler-free for anyone who has not yet read the Mockingjay book. So when we last left PETA, at the end of Mockingjay Part 1, he had been hijacked. That means his mind had been altered by the Capitol so that he now views Katniss, love of his life, as a deadly enemy. So much so that he has this irresistible impulse to kill her as soon as he sees her and has to be physically restrained from doing so. So what exactly did the Capitol do to him? Well, here's how BT explains it to us. Imagine that I ask you to remember something, either with a verbal suggestion or by making you watch a tape of the event. And while that experience is refreshed, I give you a dose of Tracker-Jacker venom. Not enough to induce a 3-day blackout, just enough to infuse the memory with fear and doubt. And that's what your brain puts in long-term storage. So Prim asks,
Is that what they've done to PETA? Taken his memories of Katniss and distorted them so they're scary? Beetee. So scary that he'd see her as life-threatening, that he might try to kill her. Yes, that's our current theory. So, basically, this hijacking procedure is the Capitol's way of turning PETA into a weapon. Now, one thing that's interesting is that this is the book description. The description was a little bit different in the movie, where it said that the Capitol actually included beatings and torture as part of the hijacking procedure. In the book, the Tracker Jacker venom was enough. Now, we know from Katniss's experience in the 74th Hunger Games that the main effect of Tracker Jacker venom is frightening hallucinations. So, fear conditioning is a form of Pavlovian conditioning, which is a way of creating a learned or a conditioned association between two different stimuli. In Pavlov's very familiar example, a dog has a reflexive or an unconditioned response to food. It salivates. So what Pavlov did is he took a neutral stimulus, a sound, and he typically used sounds like metronomes, buzzers, or tones rather than bells like you see in a lot of textbooks, and presented it right before he showed the dog the food. Now, after a few such pairings, where the neutral stimulus, the sound, is presented before the unconditioned stimulus, the food, producing the unconditioned response, salivation, the dog learns to salivate to the metronome by itself. So the metronome has now become a conditioned stimulus, and the salivating in response to the sound, even when food is not present, is now a conditioned response. Now, once you have the animal conditioned, you can undo this conditioning or cause the animal to unlearn the conditioning through a different process. If you, after that, repeatedly give the metronome, the conditioned stimulus, multiple times without ever pairing it with food again, what happens is eventually the salivation slows down and ultimately will stop altogether. This is a process called extinction. And it often takes, however, more effort, more exposure to the stimuli to unlearn or extinguish the process than it does to set it up initially. Now, it is not just physiological responses like salivation that can be conditioned. So can emotional responses. So John B. Watson, the founder of the behaviorist movement in psychology, and his student, shown here, Rosalie Rayner, showed conditioned fear responses in humans in this very famous 1920 study with little Albert. Now, little Albert was a baby, about a year and a half old, and as you may be able to see here, what they're doing is they're giving him a laboratory rat to play with. Now, this was, oops, let that go away. Sorry. This was a nice, tame laboratory rat that initially little Albert liked very much, enjoyed playing with. But what they did is they exposed him to it, and then one day when he was playing with the rat, what Watson did is he struck a piece of metal with a hammer, made this very loud noise. That, of course, scares the baby, and he starts to cry. His mother would then pick him up and comfort him. Just so you know, current ethical rules would not allow this type of experiment to be approved, even if a parent was there and even if they agreed to it. But those rules did not exist in 1920. But it took 7 of these pairings over a period of a couple of days, and the rat became a conditioned stimulus for fear. Now, whenever little Albert was given the rat, he would whimper, he would try to crawl away from it, he no longer wanted to play with it. So the rat that was previously enjoyable to him has now become something that he is afraid of. Now this is basically what happened to PETA. Just like little Albert liked the rat at the beginning, at the start of this process, PETA was madly in love with Katniss. So much so that he was willing to die for her. But Katniss is basically plays the role of the laboratory rat in this case. They show him presumably a video of Katniss, and then inject PETA with the tracker jacker venom, producing the unconditioned response of intense fear. Do this a few times, and Katniss herself becomes a stimulus for fear, and in fact, not just a little bit of fear, a very intense, irrational fear, so much so that PETA tries to kill her, believing she is an immediate threat to his life. So this is basically pure fear conditioning. Now, what is interesting to me about this fear conditioning process is that in some people, it seems to form the basis for post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. What seems to happen when a person develops PTSD is that they undergo fear conditioning, an intense form of fear conditioning, often a single exposure, and then fail to undergo extinction or extinguish. So here's an example, for instance, in a paper by Van L. Zucker, published in 2014. Uses the example of a soldier who is passing a trash pile on the side of the road, and there's an explosion. And he either experiences severe injuries himself or witnesses other people being injured. So that is a powerful unconditioned response, of course, for fear has now been associated with this neutral stimulus, the trash pile. But what might happen in this if the soldier fails to undergo extinction? Years later, far away from Iraq, he goes by a similar trash pile, and that triggers the fear and the painful memories. This is now someone who has PTSD. In fact, some researchers have found that PTSD patients, in fact, don't undergo extinction as readily as non-patients. Here's an example of a study that was done in actually 2007. Sorry about that. Comparing PTSD patients with patients who had actually experienced similar trauma but had not developed PTSD, and then a non-traumatized group. So here is what they did. They conditioned these patients to feel mild anxiety at the sight of a shape. And they did this by showing them a shape and then administering a mild shock. Now, it may surprise you to see scientists shocking humans in an experiment, but these are modestly painful shocks, but not dangerous. They don't cause any injury. And in studies like this, participants are informed of what's going to happen and agree to it ahead of time. They can also quit anytime if this is getting to be too much for them. The intention of these shocks is to produce a startle response, not to be excruciatingly painful. In fact, the startle is actually picked up by this machine called a galvanic skin response recorder, or galvanic skin response unit. This is a machine that measures very subtle changes in perspiration that come with emotional arousal. And in fact, it's sensitive enough, it can pick up changes in perspiration that come with nervousness, even if the person doesn't show any external sign of being alarmed or nervous or scared. And so pair the shape with the shock repeatedly, and classical conditioning or fear conditioning occurs. The shape by itself comes to produce a galvanic skin response. So see the shape, even if you're not being shocked, your perspiration rate will increase slightly. And so what the scientists did is they got all three groups conditioned to show this response, and then they put them on extinction. So then they started showing them the shape without shocking them. So you would expect under the normal extinction process for, with repeated showings of the shape, no shocks, the galvanic skin response is going to reduce in intensity and eventually stop entirely. And that is what happened, but it happened much slower in the post-traumatic stress disorder patients. The other two groups underwent extinction faster. So, one difference between someone who develops PTSD in response to trauma and someone who doesn't may be a difference in this extinction process. So, what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder? Like all psychiatric conditions, PTSD has very specific diagnostic criteria. These are the symptoms from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. I'm giving you the ones from the 4th edition because that was the one that was current when Suzanne Collins wrote the Hunger Games series. There is a new version out as of 2013. Symptoms are slightly different, but generally the same for post-traumatic stress disorder. So, in order to be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to experience trauma, experienced or witnessed trauma. That includes death, threatened death, injury, threat of harm. And you have to, during that experience of trauma, feel fear, horror, or helplessness. Second, after the trauma, you have to somehow re-experience the event on a regular basis. For instance, by having intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks, or physical emotional distress at things that remind you of the trauma. Third, you have to have either a tendency to avoid related stimuli, avoid things that remind you of the trauma, or a numbness in your overall emotional responsiveness. So you have to have 3 of the following symptoms. Avoid thinking or talking about trauma. Avoid people or places associated with the trauma. Difficulty remembering aspects of the trauma. Reduced interest in activities. Reduced emotional attachment or emotional detachment from others. Reduced emotional reactivity overall, and a sense of foreshortened future, meaning you don't think you will live a full life, or you don't think you will ever marry or have children or have a job or have a relationship. You think your life has been cut off or cut short in some way, either in quantity or quality, because of this experience. So you also have to have 2 signs of increased arousal under certain circumstances, such as irritability, outbursts of anger, difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrated, hypervigilance, or exaggerated startle responses. The symptoms have to last for a month or more, and they have to cause some sort of significant distress or impairment in your daily life, such as disrupting or threatening your ability to hold down a job, to maintain relationships, to live on your own, to function in your day-to-day life. So you have to meet all of those criteria to get an official diagnosis of PTSD. Now, it doesn't surprise anyone that many Hunger Games characters have PTSD, given all that these people go through. I have heard some people argue that Katniss has PTSD even before her first Hunger Games, even before she volunteers to take Prim's place in the arena, tracing back to the time of her father's death in the mining accident and then her family's near starvation afterwards. She clearly still does have symptoms before she goes into the game. She has nightmares about the mine accident. She has emotional detachment from others, particularly her mother. A sense of foreshortened future. For instance, she tells Gail she cannot see herself getting married or having children. There's certainly times of irritability, times of hypervigilance. But I would argue that she does not have full-fledged PTSD before the 74th Hunger Games, because I don't think she meets that last criteria 6, disruption in the life. She is actually, all things considering, functioning pretty well. She hunts, she barters for food, she supports her family so that they are actually better off than most in the scene. She may not have a lot of friends, but she has good, close, healthy relationships with both Prim and Gail. And her schoolmates, like Peta, Madge, Deli, they admire her. The people in the hub respect her when they trade with her, when they see her in the market selling her goods. Now, undoubtedly, she has a very hard life. It is District 12, and everyone has a hard life there. But prior to the 74th Games, Katniss is functioning pretty well. So I would argue at that point she does not meet the criteria for a PTSD diagnosis. After the Games, yes, she does. All of her symptoms increase, both in severity and in frequency, and she loses her ability to cope on a daily basis. She's no longer getting pleasure in hunting. She's not as comfortable with Gale and is withdrawing from him. As a victor, she is supposed to be developing a talent of some sort, but she can't do it. So finally, they fake it for her. They tell everybody she's designing clothes, but reality is Senna's actually designing the clothes and passing them off as her work. When she learns about the Quarter Quell and learns that she has to go back to the arena, she freaks out. She runs away, smashes a window, can't remember cutting her hand afterwards. She goes over to Haymitch's and gets drunk. She winds up basically in bed for a couple of days with her mother taking care of her. Now, this is Katniss. She hasn't needed her mother to take care of her since she was about 12 years old. So, I would say at that point, her life is undergoing a significant disruption because of her symptoms. And so, yes, I would say after the Games, she has full-fledged PTSD. I'd also say that Haymitch probably has PTSD right from the moment we meet him because he is excessively jumpy, irritable, sleeps with a knife in his hand, escapes by being drunk most of the time. And while our movie viewers have not seen too much of Joanna Mason yet, given that she was being held hostage in the Capitol most of the last movie, we do get to know her better in the second half of Mockingjay book. I hope we will get to know her better in the second half of the Mockingjay movie as well. And it is clear from her portrayal there that she has post-traumatic stress disorder, probably because of the torture she underwent in the Capitol. So now one character I think managed to get through his first Hunger Games, at least, without PTSD, is Peta. And for the same reason as Katniss. After the first Games, at the start of Catching Fire, before the Quarter Quell, so in that interval, he is actually doing pretty well. He is visiting his family regularly. He's working in the bakery, making cakes and cookies. He has taken up painting for a talent and is making pictures, and so he's meeting his responsibilities there. When the Quarter Quell is announced, he's the one who keeps it together. He's the one who dumps out the liquor, tells Katniss and tells Katniss and Haymitch they are not drinking anymore and that they're going into training so they can beat the careers in the Quarter Quell. Yes, he has symptoms, just like Katniss does. He has nightmares and outbursts and other difficulties, but again, he's functioning. At that point, they are not completely disrupting his life, so I think PETA made it through the first games without PTSD. That, of course, changes drastically after the hijacking. Obviously, he's in a very different place then. So, just as hijacking is an exaggerated version of fear conditioning, PETA now has exaggerated PTSD symptoms. So, let's compare regular PTSD symptoms with what's going on with PETA. Typical PTSD patient is going to have distress and reactivity to stimuli. PETA has a lot of distress and a lot of reactivity. He has this uncontrollable urge to kill Katniss. So, well more than plain everyday overreactivity taken to an extreme. Typical PTSD patient is going to have memory lapses about the event. PETA has a complete set of false memories that he cannot distinguish from the truth. For instance, he remembers Katniss killing his family. She never did that, but the Capitol has made PETA believe that she did. So, again, exaggeration. Emotional attachment from others. Of course, PETA is not just detached from Katniss, he completely hates her. Even though he had loved her, was willing to give his life for her previously, he doesn't just hate her, he doesn't think she's human. He has become convinced she's a mutt that has been sent and created to destroy him. Sense of foreshortened future. Well, PETA tries to get people to kill him, to put him out of his misery. He is in such a bad state after this. So he goes beyond thinking simply that he's not going to live long. He tries to make sure he doesn't live long. Irritability, moodiness, and anger. PETA, this goes again to an extreme. He is completely uncontrollable, homicidal rages, and you have to keep him restrained the entire time. And finally, the typical symptom, exaggerated startle response. So you go tap someone on the shoulder and they overreact. Well, PETA doesn't even need the tap on the shoulder. He can go off into these rages with no apparent stimuli whatsoever. As Hamish says, he goes off for no reason. So Joanna remarks in the Mockingjay book that the Capitol had turned PETA into an evil mutt version of himself. I think it's actually more accurate to say that they have given him an evil mutated version of post-traumatic stress disorder. So, that's it for this video. On the next one, we're going to look at the various ways the folks in District 13 come up with for trying to cure PETA of his hijacking. And very interestingly, these methods are similar to those used in modern treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder. So, that is all for now. If you would like to continue or have more discussion of topics like this, there are a few things you can do. First, you can check out the next video in this series, Psychology in Panem. Second, you can visit www.hogwartsprofessor.com. That is John Granger's blog, where I and several other people who are enthusiastic about the Hunger Games and other books write on a regular basis. This presentation is actually based on an essay that I've written for a book that will be coming out next May from Salem Press. It's called Critical Insights, The Hunger Games. So you can check that out when it's published. Finally, I hope to produce more videos on psychology in young adult literature, not just on the Hunger Games, but on other books as well. Harry Potter, my new favorite, Divergent. There's tons of psychology in the Divergent series. So I am actually starting an email list for people who are interested in this. If you would like alerts as to when the new videos are coming out, send me an email at divergentindepth divergentinDepth@gmail.com. So I am particularly interested in hearing from teachers and students who are using Hunger Games in the classroom and fans of the series who have an interest in psychology. So if you're interested in getting alerts, send an email to divergentinDepth@gmail.com. This is my own email list, and I will not be passing it on to anyone else. So thank you, and see you next time.
So that's it. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you'll come back for part 2. Please remember the email, divergentinDepth@gmail.com. In the meantime, I'm Louise Freeman from Mary Baldwin College, saying, may the odds be ever in your favor.